Bush too. Should be two lights up. There we go. Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the Lake Kemp workshop, which councillors have asked for to get some more information on what is happening at Lake Kemp. So welcome to councillors, staff, and invited and participants, and the public, and all those who are listening in from home as well. Today's workshop is being live streamed through Council's Facebook and via the YouTube channels. And there's a lot of interest in the subject as well, so it's a fact-finding mission for us today as councillors. So with us today for Environment Canterbury, we have Elaine Moriarty, a surface water scientist. Welcome, Elaine. Judith Earle-Goulet, General Manager of Catchment Implementation. Welcome, Judith. And from Department of Conservation, we have Tony Preston, the Operations Manager. Welcome, Tony. And from Central South Island Fish and Game, we've got the CEO, Steve McNaught. Welcome, Steve. So there's no apologies from our end. We're all here, which is great. So the purpose of the workshop is to an opportunity for Council to discuss the low water levels in Lake Kemp and receive some scientific opinion following the Lake Kemp Hut Holders Association request for consents to be put in place to divert that water into the lake from the Belmacan stream. And councillors, there was a presentation from the Lake Hut Holders Association presented at the Zone Committee, and that presentation has been given to you, or it'll be on your package on your computer. If you haven't looked at it, you can. It's there available to you. And the question and answers is for councillors only. It's a workshop we're in today, so we've got presentations there, and councillors to ask questions, clarification, etc. So we might move now into the presentation. Judith, if you'd like to kick off, that'll be great. Do you want to take questions on the way through, or should we wait to the end?
It's kind of built into three parts, so maybe there's a sort of science set the scene, there's some stuff around the historic consent that was in place, and then there's some added some slides around the consenting aspect. So it kind of breaks into three parts. Yep. So maybe that's a logical point to have. So
should we stop at the end of the first stage and then ask some questions on that stage, and then carry on through the three stages? That'll be great. Yeah. Thank you. Floor yours.
Tēnā koutou katoa, and thank you for having us along today. We've put this presentation together as agencies been working quite closely through the O2 Wharakai Working Group, and have had a meeting with the hut holders on this, on the proposal and idea of reinstating the diversion, as well ahead of the Zone Committee meeting. So that was back in a couple of months ago now. So appreciate the time to come together. As I mentioned, we've kind of formatted this into three parts. The science ecology aspect, Elaine and Tony will kind of talk to predominantly. Steve was quite keen to talk around the consenting aspect, given Fish and Game were the holders of that consent. And I'm going to touch on some of that aspect around the consenting process, need for consents, etc. Look, we recognise that we've got communities are really interested in this space. It's the classic examples of when competing values all come together around recreation, ecology, in-stream ecology, different habitats, etc. These are really complex issues that play out in our community, especially at times when it is extremely dry. And that's the main reason now why we have low water levels. So we're going to run through some of that, but if we can have those, I think it makes sense to have those questions. But I guess we recognise everything's connected, so if we have to loop back round to answer questions, happy to do so. I'll hand over.
Welcome, Peter. Welcome. Peter Scott, Chair of ECAN. He's joining us today.
Kia ora koutou. Just thought we'd set the scene with just highlighting the agencies that are involved in this issue. So we have Department of Conservation, and we have Ashburton District Council, our private landowners there, and it's land that is owned by the Crown but managed by different entities. So That's why all of us are here together to discuss it. So, just some images relating to how deep Lake Camp is, and from work that was done by NIWA, we can see that it's up to 19 metres deep right in the centre of the lake, and you can see that if you ever see the different colours in it, it's quite deep and dark towards the centre, and decreasing out as it fans out into, 1 or 2 metres deep, and quite shallow towards the edges. So for this slide, I'll just discuss the water quality as it currently is at Lake Camp. And generally, we would say it has a high visual clarity. And what that means is it's quite clear water. You can see through it. It's got a high ecological value. And that is determined by looking at the percentage of invasive species that are there. So something like Didymo, for example, compared to what is the more natural plants that are present within the lake, and they tend to be growing typically in the centre, down at the floor of the lake, because they need a minimum of 3 metres of water over them to remain healthy, and currently they have sufficient water over them to remain healthy. A measure that you would often see used when we talk about how healthy a lake is looking at the trophic level index. So that's the TLI. And a TLI is made up of 4 different components, and when they come together as a measurement, we would say that Lake Camp is of fair water quality. And while the TLI is fair, it does not meet the current Land and Water Regional Plan as it was set. And finally, there is significant quantity of kakahe, or freshwater mussels, present within Lake Camp, and they tend to be in the deeper part of the lake. Now, we did a site visit to Lake Camp recently in the last few days and wanted to check if there was any death occurring of kakahe, what quantity there was, how it was looking. And we found that while there was some shells on the beach, there was no greater than you would expect normally at where the water meets the edge on the beach. It's typically where you see your empty shells washing up. Actually, when the survey was done in 2021, they found that there was 50% increase in that time in the amount of kakahe present, which is great. So back in 2020, Environment Canterbury started monitoring the water level in Lake Camp, and we have a stage level there. And as you can see, when it was put in first, it went quite far down. If we're looking at May 2021, we're down at 686 metres above sea level, and then increased then typically when we get our snow melt coming in. And it remained quite high until it started drying down again through the summer of 22-23. And since then, you can see a wee plateau, and since then it has been dropping down. And the reasons for this are, as everyone knows looking around the region at the moment and around the country, the rainfall is so low. We have had record low flows in the South Ashburton, the lowest since 1988 that has been recorded by us. The region is dry, and the lake over time naturally fluctuates. I found a report that was written back in the 1960s by the Acclimatization Society, and there they talked about the fluctuations of Lake Camp and how that there was insufficient overland flow or streams coming into the lake to maintain the level of the water summer and winter. So it's very sad to see it. It's not an unnatural event that we are seeing. So as I said, it's not just around here that is dry around Old Thufarig High. You would have seen Lake Pukaki in the papers recently with the low levels there. And earlier in the autumn, we had a lot of discussion about Lake Opuha, which you can see there. The green part is the water. And right if you move from right to left, over towards the left is where it can fill up to when it's at its peak. So that's also very low levels there. And just to put it in context again of Canterbury, this is an image you can find on Environment Canterbury's website, where we look at the flows of our rivers in the region and compare them to where the median or the average flow would have been typically at this time of year. So over the record that we have, and green is good. So you can see Banks Peninsula has had a decent flow of rainfall. The rivers have had a decent flow, while then as we move towards the hill and high country, you can see more red. And when it's red there, it's very low compared to the median flow typically seen in our rivers at this time of year. I had a look through some satellite images to see, can we see what Lake Camp looked like from aerial photography in the past. This is the 21st of June, 2024, and we can see the edging effect there and the shrinkage of the lake from the edge. And this was when the water levels were a lot higher back in 2021. And in these next occasion here, you can see quite a low level of the lake water, and this was when the diversion was still in place back in 2016. I think that's the swimming, if I see on the left-hand side, that photograph of where kids jump off to go swimming, so it's very low. And the oldest image I could find online for satellite imagery of Lake Camp was back in 2006, there where we can see the water level is again quite low. I don't have a comparison, you know, it's not that easy with imagery like this to compare how far it was, but it was still, can recognize that there was a natural fluctuation happening in the water level when the diversion was in place then. And at this point, I'll pass it over to Tony. Thank you.
Shall we take some questions there, Elaine?
Sure, we can
I've
do.
got a couple on. Also, just welcome Hamish Riak, who's working from home today and just joined in on online. So he's there available if we need Hamish as well. So Richard, questions, and the questions of they're questions, they're not statements. Thank you.
The it's to do with the Kakahi. I'm sorry if I get it wrong. Is Lake Camp not a, you know, is it a spawning ground? Is it a good source of the thing? So would you not try and protect that, or, you know, as a thing, or?
Yes, it is. From the surveys we have done in partnership with Arafanoa, it is a very rich source of kakahi. But the great thing about them is that they can move and burrow, and they also tend to like the deeper water. So when the surveys are done, they find the highest densities and the highest amounts right in the centre of the lake, where we are still seeing water levels of, I would say, about 10 to 14 metres of water above them, so they're still quite happy. But thank you.
It's a bit of a point of correction. You put up a map of picture of Lake Pukeki and a Lake Opua. One of them is a hydro dam, which will be lowest this time of year, and the other one's an irrigation reservoir, which March it will be empty. So they're not comparative, because they're designed to drop then, because that's what they're designed for. So it's Lake Camp's a completely different scenario to those two
Question.
levels.
I recognise that, but I think if we reflect on the map showing the low flows in the rivers, that slide would highlight the low flows in the region overall. But thank you.
And my last question was, what's the lake done up to today? Because the graph stops a bit early. What is it today? What's it down to today? The graph carried on into August?
Well, unless we're having some snow melt, Jude can have a look right now. It's live on our website. You're able to look at it for the last 30 days. But unless there's been significant snow melt, maybe tomorrow they might rise a wee bit with snow melt. But other than that, unless there's been significant rainfall, it would be static or slightly lower, the evapotranspiration.
Councillor Mackel?
Thank you. I was just wondering what your thoughts were, the maps that you used as in comparison, as Councillor Wilson just alluded to, would it be fair to say that they had a significant supply of water against Lake Camp, which only has that stream really to top it up? I
Sorry.
was just wondering why you've used lakes that have significant supply to them, and Lake Camp hasn't. Why are you using that comparison?
I use those comparisons because there are images I had. I should have checked for other ones.
So would Lake Camp be standing out on its own as a low supply lake?
No, it wouldn't. Lake Pearson, Lake Heron, all of our lakes are looking very low at the moment.
It appears your argument is drought. That's all I've heard so far is the excuse.
The reason, that's
Yeah,
the reason.
Yeah, coming to that, the question is, at the moment, you're saying that the fish life, etc., needs 3 metres of water above to supply their livelihood as such?
Don't think I spoke about the fish life. I would leave that to Steve.
Sorry.
Apologies.
The life that's at the bottom of the lake,
Kakahe.
or whatever it was, you're saying that it was needed 3 metres for those species to to survive. Is that what I heard?
No, I don't think so. I said they're the most abundant in the centre of the lake where it is quite deep.
So you're saying
and
that
they're
it's
quite
10, you
deep.
say it's 10 to 14 metres
Metres.
at the moment.
Yeah,
Your argument is drought. We're about to go into another summer.
we are, absolutely.
When do you expect that lake to be empty?
I don't know.
Going
I-
by the level that it's been dropping, when is it going to be empty?
I really
It'll
can't
depend
comment
on
on that. I'm
rainfall.
sorry, I'm a surface water scientist. You would need to discuss that with NIWA, and maybe that's a question you as a council could bring to NIWA to look at the climate forecast.
Surely as an ECAN, etc. representatives, you would have looked into the level that it's been dropping. You would know, just going on the rate and what rainfall we have been getting and what rainfall is possibly ahead of us, you would know when panic stations would be at a level we're going to lose those species.
I would hope that with the continual monitoring that we do of it, that we would be able to see in real time when we are getting close to that or a good distance away from that. And we are not there yet. I don't know when, if it will happen, but we are currently nowhere near in danger of that lake drying up.
Yeah, I heard that, but as scientists, etc., you would have to have, looking forward, some sort of indication of when we're in deep trouble.
It really depends on the values that you are looking at the deep trouble in. If we are looking at the ecological values, which is what we do, ecologically, we have no concerns due to the drought currently the whole region is experiencing for the species within the lake.
And there's no indication of significant rainfall going
No,
forward, is that right?
that is the current prediction from NIWA.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah, I would add, and I'm not a climate scientist, but the current conditions are most likely to relate to the El Nino weather pattern that we've been having. We're currently in a neutral setting for El Nino and La Nina at the moment, and the NIWA forecast for this coming summer is for La Nina, the opposite. So, if anything, and I'm not a climate scientist, but if anything, the situation is more likely to reverse than not, based on the climate forecast for a La Nina this coming summer. So that's wetter and colder than normal in the east.
I just looked at the level of the lake, and it has risen slightly. It's 5.243 metres at the stage level, so just a slight leap up right at the edge of where we were looking at it, so we must have had a wee bit of rain or snow melt come in.
Perhaps to help with Councillor Mackel's question, if there was no rain and the lake kept dropping, how long would it take before it got to a dangerous state?
That would be something that you'd need to do quite a complicated model, because it's not just no rainfall. You're looking at where the groundwater is and how much is coming into the lake from groundwater, how much is coming in from surface water, how much is snow melt, how much is held within wetlands that would come in. It's not something that we have or have, I could comment on.
Not a simple equation.
It's not exactly. It's not a simple equation, but it's not either a imminent event that's going to happen.
Thank you. Councillor Miller.
Thank you. I've got a question. I'm quite interested in the Kakahi as well. In 2015, there was a mass collapse of the Kakahi. How would you intervene to stop that from happening? And I'm kind of interested, and you talked about surveys that you're doing, and then you also talked about some of the shells that are washing up on. So how do you kind of monitor how many there are and when you're in that dangerous situation of another mass collapse, and how would you intervene in that?
The information I've got here from our freshwater folk indicates that the majority of the freshwater mussels in Lake Camp, and they're up to 300 per square metre, so really high density.
Okay.
It's quite impressive. The highest densities live in the zone that's where all below the submerged macrophyte zone. Okay, so that's at depths greater than 11.5 metres.
Okay.
So that's probably, I'd be guessing, if the lake's down around about 3 metres at the moment, thereabouts, 2.5, 3 metres, would I be right, Elaine? So the lake would have to drop another 5 metres before you'd even get into the start of where the high density kakahi are. And yet you will find some kakahi around the edges at the moment, but that's not where the main population of kakahi are. For example, Lake Heron, we've got exposed kakahi beds. At present, there's really not a lot we can do about that. That's nature. It's nature taking its course.
So once they take hold, do they just stay in that position? They don't move? I mean, they can move. So do they not sort of find somewhere that's... No, they don't.
They can move and burrow. Yeah, they can. As to what distance and things like that, I would probably have to have a chat with Ara Fenaway. We'd probably have the best information on that locally.
Okay.
Councillor Bryan.
Thank you. Another question, just slightly off Lake Camp. On the other side is Lake Clearwater.
Yes.
Is that lower as well?
Elaine, can you please use the microphone with the people at home?
Oh, sorry, apologies. Is Lake Clearwater low? It's not experiencing the same level as Lake Camp is. Jude is just going to check it for me there, I can see. Yeah, and it gets a lot more of its flow. There's a lot greater feed coming into the lakes from surface water and from groundwater. And it's, we don't have a measurement on it, but I saw it on Sunday. It's looking fine. The water is quite high there.
So the water comes from another source then, apparently.
It's got about 14, sorry, I'll help out here. It's got about 14 times the size of the catchment. So it's a much, much larger catchment, so it's got much bigger inputs. And also being a bigger lake, it's kind of more resilient to the change and the drought that we are having. And like some of these lake levels, they're the lowest since, the early 80s potentially.
Yeah.
So,
One more question, how deep is that? Lake water.
I think off the top of my head about 14 or 15 metres, but I will ask you to have a look at Lawa, and it's on there.
Okay. Thank you.
Just while we're on Lake Camp to Clearwater, does water go from Lake Camp to Clearwater underground and comes up? I've heard that, I think.
We'd really need to do investigations to properly understand that. We have some thoughts, but I prefer us to do, at such point as we needed to know for a consent application or something like that, to do assessment.
Councillor.
They were connected at one stage, Steve tells me.
Oh, through underground.
No, surface water connected down Mount Possession Street actually. So when we built the road, we actually disconnected the two lakes.
Oh, so it doesn't filter underground, you don't think?
Yeah. There will be movement. The natural flow does go down to the wetlands running along the road, so.
Thank you. Councillor Hooper.
Thank you. Yeah, my understanding from the locals is that they are connected, and is there anything, is Lake Clearwater being monitored at all, its levels due to Lake Kemp dropping?
No, I don't think so. We monitor it on a monthly basis when we go to visit it, but it hasn't received the same level of monitoring or looking at historically as Lake Camp.
The water levels line graph that you had up, can you put that one back up, please?
Yeah.
Yep, that
Yep.
one there. So, leading into 21-22, there's a drop for a start, and then there's up 21-22, and then it's dropping away again. 21 and 22 years, were those levels anything to do with the flood events and the rain that we had?
Absolutely everything to do with it. And
But do you have concerns with where that graph's going now and the weather that we've got predicted?
I would have concerns for the levels of water across Canterbury, for all the rivers, the lakes, our groundwater. We have, I think, it was 59% when I looked last week of our groundwater wells are low to very low compared to where they typically are for this time of year. So are we concerned? Yes. Are we working with industry? Yes. Are we working with our stakeholders, with MPI and with the rural community, and acknowledging that this is really tough for people out there, that they are doing it hard with cost of living, with the economy, and now with this endless low levels of water. Yeah.
And one more quickly, sorry, thanks, Neil. Was the last survey on mussel numbers done in 2021? Is that what I heard you say?
I think so, off the top of my head.
Why haven't you done anything in the last 3 years?
It was a stable population, and we do it in partnership with Mana Whenua as to the recommendations. I don't know when we have scheduled to do it next, but we, you know, like all organisations, look at what we prioritise pieces of work, and that was not at the moment something that we are concerned about to do. We were happy with the levels of increase we saw between the two surveys, and happy that there's been no visual signs of a decrease in them. So currently we don't have concerns.
Well, I can understand why you'd be happy in 2021, but I'm not so sure about now.
Councillor Top.
Thank you. I suppose my question is, why has it taken so long to get to the stage we are now? The lake has been losing water for some time, and could we have been more proactive earlier to divert water from the Dalmatian stream? Like, you know, how long do you sit and wait when we could have been, feeding water into the lake earlier?
Kia ora, back to me. I think we've got a whole section relating to the consent and the consent history. So can we loop back round after in case there's any more water quality quantity questions? Because we will be covering this bit off in some detail.
Yeah, just to show the slide there.
We'll capture that again later, Tony.
Yeah.
Just put your light off so others can come on. Oh, sorry. Councillor Michael.
Thank you. Just bringing you back to the question for, if you could just reiterate, the level when it's at its highest at Lake Camp to where it is now, what was the drop, sorry?
Approximately 3.6 metres, I think, between 3 and 4 metres.
Yeah, so I'm no mathematician, but going on a size of a lake, I would imagine would have a lot of volume to bring it down, a lot of volume lost to bring it down to the levels it is now. So it would be more rapid, would I be correct, going forward, of loss of water there now?
Not necessarily, I would.
Yeah, not necessarily, because you're not taking into account the inputs that come in there, so we don't have a view of those inputs.
Sorry, inputs as,
Water.
well, there is none.
Well, some groundwater coming there would be the inputs from groundwater, and obviously the further in, as you remember from that graph we had showing, the further in towards the centre you go, the deeper it is.
Understood.
So you would have a lot slower decrease in water level actually as you'd go in, because there's a higher volume of water. But again, I'm no limnologist. There would be questions that...
Yeah, bringing you back to Lake Clearwater, which you just talked about, you had no concern because it had the volume of the water there on scale. So it wasn't dropping in comparison to Lake Camp, is that correct?
I wouldn't say that it's not dropping, it's that it's not at the same visual acuity as what we've got with Lake Camp.
I totally agree that it has definitely not got the same visual effect, no. And we keep alluding to what's happening down here with well waters. What has that got to do with what's happening up there? We've had a significant amount of snow. Every farmer in the district knows large snowfall recharges groundwater. So going forward, we'll be right there. Our problem here, and the discussion should be, I believe, and I hope you agree, is Lake Camp.
Can I just correct something there? There's been a significant amount of snow along the front ranges. Inland, it's exceptionally dry. So inland, a lot of the storms we've had this winter have not pushed past. Storms where Mount Hutt was getting 80 odd centimetres of snow. Inland, the ski fields were getting like 15. So there has not been a lot of snow inland.
Just one question on Lake Camp on its fullness. If its full is 100%, what percentage would it be now?
Haven't done that calculation.
50?
We're going to have to do some maths.
But you could do those maths because you know how much it's...
Potentially, Mayor Brown, I did actually ask my scientist that question, and I said, can we look at the imagery photography and look at that? But you never know from image to image what's the depth of muddiness, so what's the true floor of the lake. So it's difficult. It's a difficult assessment to make.
Okay, Rob, thanks. Lynette, Councillor Lovett.
Just asking, does trout get released into Lake Camp, or is it just all natives up there, native species?
They have been released in the past, and there's been some illegal release of salmon into Lake Camp as well in the past, but no, we're not releasing anything into Lake Camp at the moment.
Okay, so you're not concerned about them with the water levels dropping at all?
No, we're not.
Easy to catch.
So there'd be trout in there now, is it?
There could be. There is a good population of small perch, and they'll predate on anything else. So whether or not the trout is still there, there's probably a couple, but it's not high on fishing games values.
Right, thank you. Next slide.
Oh, can I just...
sorry,
really quick
Phil,
one? Sorry.
Councillor
Sorry to butting in again. I understand when Lake Camp overflows, it goes through a wetland and then into Lake Emma. Is that correct? Is there any monitoring, or what are the effects with the levels that they are now at Lake Camp on Lake Emma at the moment?
Couldn't comment on the Lake Emma levels at the moment because I haven't been there myself recently, but what I can say is that the values from a freshwater ecological perspective and the advice that I'm receiving is that the highest values are in the Lake Emma, and Emma is a lot shallower lake as well. It doesn't have the resilience that Lake Camp's got because of Lake Camp's depth, but the values, the ecological values, are in the wetlands around on the bottom of the fan, the Balmacan fan, the wetlands that are there, Lake Roundabout and Lake Emma. That's where our ecological values are the highest compared to Lake Camp. And that's certainly probably one of our concerns is if you then now divert the water and take an unnatural diversion into Lake Camp, what are the impacts on that system? Because there's always trades, right? So when we're looking at it purely from a nature ecological perspective, the values are over round about Emma side with that wetland complex there. And one thing, when I was on site last week, I went up and had a look at the intake site myself last week, And where the Balmacan finally goes underground at the moment, it's almost on the point where the water is, it's on the part of the fan where it actually wants to tip towards Lake Camp anyway. So it's entirely possible, not that we'll ever prove it because it's so hard to understand the system, that this water could be ending up in Lake Camp subterraneously anyway as groundwater. So that's why kind of our position is let nature take its course, because at the moment the water is generally staying up on the fan and feeding through groundwater, the wetland complexes, and eventually into roundabout and Emma. Yep.
And we just had a look, and Lake Emma is about 3.2 metres at the moment. It's actually been increasing. And I went there on Sunday. Yes, the levels are low there. You know, you could see the distance from the shore. But again, I know I keep harping back that everywhere is dry at the moment.
Yeah, I was more concerning, well, asking about the health, and I think we have evidence at Lake Hood of well, some concerns, and that I share those concerns for that lake as well. So the unnatural diversion you talked about, though, hasn't that been happening for many, many years? And
Last 40, apologies, the last 40 or so since whenever the consent
the lake's
original
been,
diversion
Lake Emma's
was
been
put in
okay
place.
in that time?
Look, I couldn't comment. I don't have any data for during that time, but also you need to think about this in a ecological sense. When you think about it in an ecological sense, Lake Camp's been reacting like this for well before our memory, well before anyone's memory. Lake Camp's been responding like this probably for hundreds of years, if not longer. And what we're seeing is a tiny snapshot in time. And, Lake Linden does the same thing. Lake Pearson does the same thing. The inputs are really small, so that means they're really reactive. And when you look at the shape of Lake Camp, right, Lake Camp's kind of almost built like a bathtub. It shallows out at the top end, so there's a lot of loss of real estate in terms of water. So the visual impacts are really quite high. And the recreational impacts are really quite high because you've lost a lot of surface area. But actually, there's still a lot of depth there. And that's what puts Lake Camp in good stead, given how low the water is. And I do make the comparison. I drive through Lake Linden every winter as I go skiing, and it's super low. Same thing's going on there. This is a natural process.
Yeah, I think the point Councillor Hooper was making was for the last, up until 2 years ago, going back, that water used to never make it to Lake Emma because it went into Lake Camp. And now it is all going to Lake Emma because nothing's going to Lake Camp for the last 2 years. For the last 60 years I've heard it has been diverted into Lake Camp. So it has changed. So Lake Camp should have more water because it was never getting it for the last 40 to 60 years. I think that's the point that was being made.
Yeah, but I would argue that prior to that, that was a natural system that from time to time Lake Camp would have been getting it all. From time to time, roundabout Emma would have been getting it all.
Yeah.
And sometimes it would have been shared. That's a natural system. And so that's what we're advocating for, is let nature take its course.
And I don't think, you could correct me if I'm wrong, but there's no data way back then to say what happened when it was natural, and right at the moment it's back to natural. We don't know what happened 100 years ago there, I don't think.
No, but we can surmise that that's probably what was happening because of the nature of the lake.
Yeah, and we don't know if Lake Camp 100 years ago when there was a dry period on, whether it died or not. We just don't know. But the point I think the people are making is if we do nothing, it may die until it rains. We just don't know. Yeah, that's the point. So we've got Councillor Mackle.
Yes, thank you. I love Doc's description of Lake Camp being a bathtub. A bathtub needs a supply of water. So, and I was just wondering whether you feel, as a district in Ashburton, should we be taking offence at the comment of letting nature take its course when it's been well described in the media what happened out at Green Street and the life of species out there. Should we be taking offence to that comment?
I couldn't possibly comment on Green Street. We don't have a role in that situation.
Well, I personally take offence to that comment.
Thank you, Councillor Mackel. Councillor McMillan.
Thank you. My question's about the drought and I suppose going forward, we've got climate change or changing climate, whatever you want to call it. Are we in danger that this is going to happen every year going forward? And can we do something now so that it doesn't happen and we do have a lake to enjoy?
Look, I think one of the challenges is even if there was a consent in place right now, wouldn't be water getting into Lake Camp anyway because of the low water level in Balmacan stream. So you've got issues that even when the diversion was in place, it didn't guarantee there was always water in the diversion travelling to Lake Camp. But this is where we've got some slides talking about the consent.
I guess now's a good time to press on. And
do you want to touch on that slide?
Yeah, sure. The dot on the map up there, the little red X, is where the intake site is. So I took that from a GPS reference just last week. The water from there flows through the land, the block in the green is public conservation land that we manage on your behalf. Come across to the department, I think Canterbury University might have owned it in the past, but it come across to the department in around about 2005, and it's part of the Hakatere Conservation Park. So from a consenting perspective, there would need to be, as well as a resource consent, there would need to be a easement concession for whatever structure and the first 60 odd metres worth of intake trench. The other thing that that we've been looking into is there's a couple of rare lizards that live in the area as well. White-bellied skink have been found there, as well as scree skink. And so any work that's done up there that isn't done by hand will probably require a Wildlife Act authority for killing or injuring lizards. So I'll just throw that out there as well. The other things that would need, and our process would be very similar to, we'd need the similar level of information that a resource consent would require.
Our ECAN Science team went up there on Monday, and this is just a picture of the Balmacan to show, as you know, just how low it is, and as Jude said, how even the flow at the moment, when I looked back to the original consent when it was came into place, the minimum flow that needed to be in the Balmacan is twice what the flow is at the moment before they're even allowed to take water. So it just highlights that there isn't currently flow within the river. And this is just another photograph looking up the catchment, and I don't know if a pointer here to show there. I think that was where the diversion used to be, and came across here into this lake or tarn where it was stored before it went over to Lake Camp.
Kia ora everyone, Steve McKnight from Central South Island Fish and Game. The photo that you've got there in front of you is actually the diversion structure, or the concrete gate that was put in place in around 1975 to provide some level of flood protection for the diversion itself. There's anecdotal evidence that there was something in place in terms of a diversion going all the way back to 1968 and potentially beyond then. As I said before, the two lakes, Camp and Clearwater, were connected, and the whole purpose of actually putting this diversion in place was around fisheries values. Through around about 1985, the Ashburton Acclimatisation Society would have gotten a authorisation to enable the diversion, so things were happening without authorisation before then. And then that was held by the Ashburton Acclimatisation Society, which now is part of Central South Island Fish and Game. In 1991, this is the, I suppose, handwritten note from Frank Scarf that was actually doing the application for the renewal of that authorisation in 1991. And then we had the Fish and Game councils actually formed by the Conservation Act, and they picked up the roles formerly held by the acclimatisation societies. So that was when the Act was formed and we became the South Canterbury Acclimatisation Society. There was a hue and cry all across the region saying that Ashburton isn't South Canterbury and Oamaru's not South Canterbury, and so that's when we changed, or the name got changed to the Central South Island. So a little bit of history there. In 1997 we actually applied through ECAN, if you like, for the diversion in place, and I think on the next slide I've got the concessions, if you like, that are there. So we applied in 1997, there was a bit of toing and froing that went on, and then it was awarded in 2000, and the critical conditions. So you can see there the structure and the bed maintenance by hand only, given the nature or the sensitive environment that the diversion was in, and the max flow of 56 litres per second when Balmacan was at medium flow. There was lots of instances of low flow, and that's when we could take 10 to 20 litres per second, but there were also times when there was no flow, and some of that was because there was no flow at the intake. The most recent example we've got of illegal diversion actually happened in December 2017. So I think the point that I'd like to make around this is that these sorts of diversions, or this activity to use Balmacan to fill Lake Camp, has been ongoing for many, many years. And you can see there the results. So essentially just about the whole flow of Balmacan was diverted into Lake Camp illegally, and you actually had water flowing over the road coming through. If you go on to the next one. As Central South Island Fish and Game, we received a number of non-compliance reports for our consent that we held around the Balmacan diversion, and that prompted us to do a whole heap of work, just a couple of snips there of the different of the reports and stuff that we did, to across probably about 3 years, to actually understand what was a fit for purpose solution to this problem. And the main problem that we're trying to address here is the illegal tutuing with the diversion structures that were up there. So we met with Fish and Game, DOC and ECAN to discuss the division, the controls and the consent limits. We received a further non-compliance report in May 2019. That was mainly around being able to report the flow and monitor the consent conditions itself. And then we built this proposed solution. You can see it, or you can't see it, but back in 1920, if you like, it was going to cost us around about $32,000 to $50,000 to actually put a fit-for-purpose solution to the Balmacan diversion in place. In November 2020, we all know what happened in 2020, but Central South Island Fish and Game Council decided to surrender the consent. Basically, that surrender was based around the fact that our licence sales were crashing because people couldn't go fishing due to COVID. The costs were escalating because we were uncovering more and more, and then the low use of the fishery associated with Lake Camp. So just to give you a view, we do a survey every 7 years on where New Zealanders go fishing, and Lake Camp attracts around about 0.27% of the angling effort in the Central South Island region, and it just didn't make sense for us to be spending licence holder funds on satisfying the demand for a fit-for-purpose diversion. Just anecdotally, I've also been up to the site. You can see the top photo is what it used to look like. The bottom photo is actually what it looks like now. So you're going to have to get that water uphill to actually get it to even the existing diversion point. That would have started from around that June 2021 significant flood impact, and there's quite a large cut that the stream has now made. I would go so far as to suggest that that diversion point is no longer fit for purpose if you did get a consent, or you were to apply for a consent. This photo is just going back in the other direction. You can see that concrete structure is at the front there. You can see someone's built a rock wall across the stream, and you can actually see that the existing diversion race is just a hole in the ground where someone's dug it out, but the existing diversion race no longer exists. And then the last piece is where we are now. So significant El Nino weather conditions have impacted lake levels again, and it's resulting for calls for reinstatement of the consent.
Good.
Is there any questions?
Yeah, I think there's a couple there coming up. I just have one. For your fishing game, have any fishing game fishermen talked to you about Lake Camp recently, about do they want water or they don't, or have you had any comments?
No, the most recent comments we've had is when we attended the meeting with the hut holders and talking about the perch fishery and kids fishing in the lake and stuff like that. But other than that, no, we haven't.
Thanks, Rob. Councillor Mackel.
Thank you. Just your timeline there. It just appeared obvious to me as a group, Fishing Game, ECAN and DOC have all been aware as a group through that timeline what was going to happen, and it appears up to date you've basically just turned your back on the lake because it didn't fit your purpose.
What's the question?
Did you turn your back on the lake?
No, we've got bigger, if you excuse the pun, fish to fry. For example, Lake Benmore has got 30,000 angler days every year.
That doesn't answer my question. My question is, have you turned your back on the lake? Because that's definitely what it appears you have done as a group.
If we'd turned our back on the lake, we wouldn't be here today. We wouldn't have engaged with hut holders. We wouldn't have engaged with the other stakeholders around us.
Did you let the consent lapse? Did you let the consent lapse?
No, we didn't let the consent lapse. We surrendered the consent because it did not make sense to invest more than $50,000 of our licence holder funds in something that did not have the fisheries values associated with it.
Thank you. Councillor Brown.
Thank you. Belmachan stream, is there any water going through?
Yep, there's water going through it at the moment, yeah.
So if the diversion was there, would it be working?
No.
And why not?
I think from ECAN, the recent flow gauging of Belmachan was 46 litres per second. That's even below what the median flow would be for us to allow us to take anything.
Okay.
What level did it have to be at for you to take some, if you had the consent?
Median flow was about 150.
150, was it? And it's 46 at the moment?
Yes.
Thank you. Councillor Wilson.
What have you got records of Belmachan stream flow back? How far back do they go? Because that comes to minimum, that's a critical thing with minimum flows. That's what I'm sort of getting at.
Yeah, we have limited details on the Balnacan. When I went to check back on it, it's not a stream we regularly monitor. So no, we don't. But I would imagine when you look at the stream, you can see it comes down the catchment and then spreads out into a fan, which would then go underground a lot and then pop out in different places. So it's not an easy thing to monitor because of the fact that it spreads out across such a wide catchment of gravels and has such a connection to groundwater.
Will you have some minimum flows and data on that Because obviously if you're going to apply for a consent, the next part is you need to understand the river, you know.
Absolutely, and that would be all part of a pre-application meeting that whoever the applicant would have with Environment Canterbury.
So, the question, Liz, and then we'll move on to consenting. Yeah, yes.
Oh, okay. So I went up there on Sunday as well and walked up there and took a couple of photos. So you're saying that's not a viable place for the diversion to be anymore. Where would it be if you could put a diversion in place?
If you were walking up there, you would have seen the water going across the dock track. There are a number of channels across that paddock on the uphill side there. Potentially there's something there, but again, you're going to have to go through a hydrologist to actually understand where the water's going to do that. I don't think that actually, like, to get water to that diversion point, you're actually going to have to build a dam.
Consenting.
Thanks so much. Look, I've put together a few slides around consenting, and I've started with some real basics because it seems to me that there's often not a good understanding or there's some perception or misperception about why consents occur or why they're needed or why they shouldn't be needed, etc. So this is straight from MFE's website, that a consent is a permission for an activity that might affect the environment, it also might affect other people's values, and isn't allowed as of a right in a district or regional plan. So both regional councils and district councils deal in the issuing consents for different activities. So in our particular case for Environment Canterbury with things like diverts, it would come under the regional plan. So that is the Canterbury Land and Water Regional Plan. So the Resource Management Act sets out the requirements for councils to manage natural and physical resources through both complying with the provisions in the Resource Management Act, so that sets out particular things that have to happen, that we have to prepare regional plans as a regional council that set out and engaged, developed with the community, that set out specific regional aspects to the plan, so they might be more refined than what's in the Resource Management Act. And also they need to, as a regional council, implement national environmental standards. So the parts of the Canterbury Land and Water Regional Plan that relate to the Ashburton district, and in this case this area formed part of the Ashburton River catchment, was notified in 2012. As you'll have heard from Steve, a requirement for a consent or some form of authorisation for an activity of diverting water is not new. This isn't something. It was actually in place back in 1985, which predates the Resource Management Act. So that was through the South Canterbury Catchment Board, etc. So I just want to highlight this idea of having to authorise the diversion or allocation of resources for different purposes isn't a new thing. So it's not something just cooked up. In the Resource Management Act, there are 3 activities that a divert relates to. So actually, the consent that Fish and Game held actually was composed of 3 different consent numbers, one relating to each, but they treat it as a bundle, but they relate to these different sections of the Act. There's the structures, works and beds of lakes and rivers, section 13, water takes, section 14, and the discharge to land and water, section 15. The first 2 bullet points, the Resource Management Act, when it came to effect in 1991, put some very strict aspects around things around our rivers and lakes and water and the movement of water. The default position was that you required a permission from a council unless it was explicitly stated in a plan that it could be a permitted activity. Okay, so the default was you had to ask for permission. When it comes to other activities like discharge to air, land use, discharge to land and water, the RMA provision actually flips. The default is you're allowed to do it unless the plan specifically says you have to get a consent. Okay, so they're 2 subtly different, but they were put in place for distinct purposes. So if we look at our regional plan, the Canterbury Land and Water Regional Plan, Under the first two bullet points for structure works and beds and lakes and rivers and water takes, there isn't a rule that expressly allows for it, so therefore a consent would need to be applied for. And there are permitted activity levels for discharge to land and water, but it's unlikely that a proposal would comply with that permitted activity. It would have to be assessed depending on the proposal, and so it's likely a consent would be required. So I just thought I'd frame that out quite simply. I just put this slide here because we have been asked about Environment Canterbury as a consent holder, and and I think you as the Shepparton District Council may be facing the same question. But so Environment Canterbury is required to get consents when we undertake and need to do work in things like rivers. So we have to get the consents and the authorisation. There is no exemption of consents and authorisation just because we're the regional council. We actually still need to get them, and that comes at the costs associated as it would with anyone else. We do hold some consents, and those are often related to our flood protection and drainage works. In most circumstances, it's not considered appropriate to be both a consent holder and the regulator. So when it comes to the situations where we go through a consent process to undertake our work, we have to separate the decision-making process out, such as I'm sure there are circumstances for building this building you would have had to have done as a district council and building consents. So we have to get, it needs to be processed by a third party and independent decision makers, and that all adds to the cost. So there is no exemption and free consents, everything costs. So I just wanted to highlight that because I think there's this perception that Environment Canterbury doesn't need consents to do these sorts of things, but actually we do. And I just want to, the process of consents do come with costs, but also once they're granted, there are ongoing costs associated with them. And Steve's alluded to some of those costs that they explore in holding that consent for both being able to become compliant and meet the new regulations and requirements around the measurement of water when you are taking water from a point source. So I just wanted to highlight that out because that's a very real thing. Look, the consent process can be really daunting, both from a bureaucratic gathering all the information, knowing what to do, how do you make the assessments, the cost, etc. We recognise that, and Environment Canterbury does have a pre-application service and are really happy to work with applicants through their proposal before they lodge to make sure when they come to lodgement they've got all the information and it's as seamless and as simple as possible, as well as exploring alternative options of, if you did it this way, you might get through. But it requires an applicant. That's the issue. And I mean, back at the hut holders AGM, at the point I mentioned when this was first raised back in February, I mentioned a consent's going to be needed. So that's the pinch point that comes at who's going to be the consent holder, who's going to have the discussion with Environment Canterbury around what might be possible and how we could navigate those tensions and balancing acts, and then who's going to be responsible for the ongoing costs and maintenance and hopefully not interference by third parties in the future if it was successfully granted. So there are lots of things required: technical reports, assessments, an assessment of environmental effects, permissions when it involves different landowners or different aspects, and Tony's mentioned the fact that for the Department of Conservation there would likely be some permissions and authorisations of some form also required. So it doesn't make it an easy process. But I guess coming back to basics, the purpose of a consent is that it recognises that the impacts of a resource use on the environment can impact the values, and they can be both positive and negative. And so the application allows you to state what they are, why you're wanting to undertake the activity, and what are the benefits to the values, the positive outcomes, but also how are you managing the negative impacts that might occur. And that process is really about that balance of values and how do we make fair resource management decisions. So that's the point of it. It allows that conversation and process to occur. So you're not kind of robbing Peter to pay Paul, but where you can, you've got this maybe a win-win scenario. Yeah. So that's the end what we have.
Thanks for that. It's a good overview of the whole system and how it all connects together, which is great. So we've had questions as we've been going through, and I see there's more lights on, so there's more questions coming. So we'll go to Councillor Mackel.
I understand what you're saying about the consents, etc., and basically the buck stops with you guys. But if for putting, poor choice of words, but you handing out the consent as such. For argument's sake, what happens if no one applies for a consent to get this Bark Lane stream rediverted? What happens? You've stated in the media that it's all the life inside the lake, it's all your responsibilities, etc., as different avenues. So what happens? Going forward, there's absolutely no one going forward applies for a consent and that lake goes dry.
Yeah.
What are you going to do?
So I think there's several aspects to this. One is we don't know, none of us can predict the future, because if there's a good dose of rain, things will pop up again, and it will, we'll get this fluctuating lake level. That's nature doing its thing. If in the scenario I'm assuming you're referring to, which is there is no rain and it just keeping lower and lower and lower, then at some point, we'll have to have another conversation.
Yeah, but my question is, what is that conversation?
I don't know. The other bigger question is there any water to put in it? That's the other question, of course. So, yeah.
Well, going by the photos, there's water available at the moment, at the off date. So, but didn't answer my question again. What happens if no one applies for a consent going forward? If everyone says, right, can't do it, too expensive, blah, 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 then it's back on your doorstep. What are you going to do?
Peter, please. Just have to go off. Everyone go off for Peter coming on. Lane, off. Yeah. Go, Peter.
Sorry.
Lane off. Lane off.
Oh, I did it.
Yeah, I'm sorry, Councillor Mackel. Look, I don't know if we can answer that. I think the discussion that we need to have here is there a mood for a consent? And then if there isn't, because the communities need to have that discussion, I think that's, and it's, thank you for the opportunity to do this, but I think that's a leading question to staff. From my point of view, what will happen if you don't get one? Let's see if there's an appetite for one, and then we'll move on to the next one.
No, we'll go to Peter. You go off. Push your button.
Oh, sorry.
Lane, question.
One for me. I think it's for Steve. Okay, there's not enough water, so we can't, get it away. But in the stream itself, if we don't have a diversion, where is the water going through? Where is it going to? Where is it ending up for a start? So no diversion. Where's the water going? I don't fight it for it. Just give me an answer.
Downhill. Heading towards Emma Roundabout through that. I don't know that there's not underground water going to camp now. We don't know the answer to that. Just being up there and having a look, you can see it right on the surface of the paddock. That's right beside the dock track there at the moment. It's running through that paddock at the moment. There's other channels that have obviously been existing in the past. It'll do what it's going to do across that fan.
So if there is enough water, we've got snow, all things are going fine, it should be getting into the lake?
Yep, that other little stream that you can see about halfway down the lake, that's actually running, or it was yesterday when it wasn't frozen.
Okay.
Yep.
Councillor Lovett.
Just looking into the future, consents and regulations are getting harder and harder and more costly to get. And up here, it's a lake used for recreation, and we like the fresh water to keep it good. Where does human activity set the values, the well-being of the district, and where does it come with the natural environment and ecosystems? Does it rate at all, or human activities right at the very bottom 5%, or how do you
So this,
look at the good?
yeah, so there's two aspects at play. The RMA does allow for a multitude of values to be accounted for. So it isn't just all purely natural. So it is about a sustainable management of our resources. So that's where I go. It's you in your applying for your consent. You can highlight the benefits for recreation or tourism and all those things, or economic, as well as those other things. So the Resource Management Act as a framework enables that. Under the current NPS National Policy Statement for Freshwater. Sorry, I'm getting all my freshwater management, my acronyms, which is still the national policy, is still the framework that's in place. There is a hierarchy of obligations that have been identified. Now, with the change of government, there is the talk about that being revisited, but you as a council, just like Environment Canterbury as a council, have to deal with the law that's in front of you at the time for those decisions. And that hierarchy of obligation does say for the health of the river first, and it has a different hierarchy. So I guess we've got that tension playing at the moment. We've got that tension then playing with, a shift in, the politics in which we have as a nation as well. So that's an aspect.
The other question I had, the road they put in between the two lakes, did that stop all the stream and everything refreshing Lake Camp?
From a fisheries values perspective, Lake Clearwater has got a lot more streams that trout, etc., can go and spawn in. So the whole reason for putting the diversion in place was to create a spawning stream for Lake Camp, because it was isolated from Clearwater. So from that perspective, and now that we're not stocking it, there's very few trout and stuff in there, there is no need for that.
Is Lake Clearwater or Camp, who's higher or lower, or are they both the same height?
Camp.
Camp is higher, so the water can't naturally flow from Clearwater into Camp. It would be going uphill if it did.
Yeah, but the fish can swim upstream.
Yeah, they're good at it. Who have we got? Councillor McMillan.
Yeah, me, thank you. You mentioned the Land and Water Regional Plan before. So is Lake Camp meeting the water quality requirements for that at the moment?
No, Lake Camp isn't meeting the TLI at the moment.
Lake Clearwater? Or are any of the lakes meeting
No,
requirements?
I don't think so, no.
None of them up there.
Yes. Councillor Hooper.
Thank you. Apart from the middle bit of Lake Camp, the rest of the lake, say 80% of it would be of similar depth to Lake Hood, one would suggest. Water's not flowing into Lake Hood and it's developed an algal bloom. Mm-hmm. Can you tell everybody in this room that that won't happen in Lake Camp?
I can't give any guarantees like that. Sorry, no.
Deeper,
Yeah.
They are very different in terms of the nutrient inputs that go into those two lakes. So one wouldn't necessarily use Lake Hood, as we were talking about Pukaki and Opua before. You wouldn't use Lake Hood as an example of what would happen at Lake Camp.
Who owns Lake Camp? Whose jurisdiction is it under?
Ashburton District Council.
Really?
Yeah.
It's vested.
Vested.
It's public conservation land vested in Ashburton District Council.
Right.
Yeah.
That's great. Councillor Brown.
Thank you, Neil. Another question. If we go for a consent, like council says, right, let's do it. We need it. How much time before we get a consent? If we're really doing it, we're doing it all right. What is the quickest?
This is a really complex question because
I
there's
know.
about and I guess I'm just going to break it down in stages, because the discussions that you have prior to formally lodging the application that makes sure you've got all the evidence and information and permissions all ready to go and all bundled up means that the process to then make a decision can be relatively quickly and hopefully within the statutory timeframes of 20 days. Where we've traditionally run into problems is when there's gaps of missing information and we have to go out and ask for more, and it could be 6 months to get that specialist report from a consultant. I don't know, I'm just not saying that's necessarily the case in this situation, and coming back. So it's all about the. And Environment Canterbury would love to work with an applicant around this process to help build that package to make sure when it comes to actually lodging it, everything is lined up.
So if I understand it, what you're saying is if we do it all with half a year, we should be getting to a point, if we're doing it right,
Yeah.
to get some water in or get a consent in, or then we can start, if we get it, to fix it or whatever we want to do. I just tried.
Yeah, look, it's really. I mean, I don't know because it all depends on with the proposal. What is all that evidence you need? What is the ecological assessment that you need contain? Do you need to go off and get additional information from somewhere else? And that's the bit I don't know. I don't know if that's 2 weeks somebody's got it on the desk somewhere versus someone has to go and do an investigation. That's where it becomes unknown, and that's why by having a conversation with a prospective applicant we could flesh that out a bit more. I don't know what time your authorisations take.
Probably the same answer,
Yeah.
to be really honest, because we want the same information.
Yeah.
It's about hydrology and ecology, and what you've hopefully heard today is it's a really complex system, and it's hard to understand. And to be able to make the right decision, we need to be able to understand that, and that's going to be up to the applicant to demonstrate what the impacts would be, both positive and negative. So that could take time. It could take 6 months to get the understanding to get you to the point of being able to put an application in.
Yeah. So there's nothing we can do physically in the first half a year.
Just to be clear there, could you sort of name the reports that we required to go into for a consent?
So depending on what the proposal is, this is where there's always a chicken and egg aspect, because it depends how you plan. What a proposal sets out would be what you're asking for, i.e. divert water from X to Y, how you plan to do that. Does it involve heavy machinery or is it the old days, by hand, etc. And then you need the assessments on what are the likely hydrological and ecological impacts on that. So that's where you're going. If we move water from Balmacan towards Lake Camp, what is the effect of that going to be on the wetlands below that would normally or is currently going to and into Lake Roundabout and Lake Emma? So that's the assessment. Now, some of that information is publicly available. So, but there is others like the hydrology aspect that you might need specialist advice from. So.
Because it's been happening for the last 60 years or so, then that information should be readily obtainable because it's already been happening. Is that right?
I don't know the details of it, but I would suspect there's a fair bit publicly available. Yeah.
The bit we don't know yet is what happens if we don't put water into Lake Camp, because that's what's happening right now. Because the previous 60 years, it has been going in when the Louise stream's been high enough. So obviously there'll be a lizard report too. I think I heard there was a lizard spotted.
Yeah,
White-bellied.
White-bellied skink, national.
White-belly, yeah.
And then you've also got the screw skink, which are nationally vulnerable. And the advice that I'm getting from our freshwater person is that, unfortunately, from the 60 years of the consent, there was no monitoring going on, so there's very little known. So it's not like we can fall back on the knowledge of what was happening before and be able to relate that to whether it was having an impact or not. So that just adds another layer of, it's probably a lost opportunity, to be honest. Yeah.
And you won't be able to comment on it, but the cost of these reports and the cost of it would be the hundreds of thousands, do you think?
I wouldn't expect they would be. When we procure reports, it could be $25,000 to $50,000, depending on what the nature of the report, the complexity and things like that. But Environment Canterbury be more than happy to talk with the applicant so that they had a really clear idea before they committed to doing the report of what was needed, what information we had, what information DOC and Fish and Game had, and how we could help you build up as much of the picture first, and then help you go through the process of getting the external information you needed.
Right, so you can give us that information.
Yeah,
to make
absolutely.
that-
There's a whole load of work that would happen between the applicant and the science team, as well as the consenting team, of sitting around a table and figuring out how it could work if with an applicant, if it was
So,
there.
so you're more than happy to go through that process with an applicant to enable it to come out to a solution?
Absolutely, we're more than happy to sit with an applicant and discuss that with them.
Thank you.
And get far more detailed science than I can give, that my science team can, get down into that level of detail of each river and stream that you're looking for. I have a team that can do that with you.
Councillor Todd.
Thank you. Just flowing on from Lane's question regarding consents, would that be publicly notified?
So the decision on the point at which a decision is made as to whether something can be non-notified or publicly notified is based on the scale and significance. So we can't predetermine that outcome. So I don't know. But that would be something in the pre-app we would explore to give an indication if we felt it was so outside of what was fitting in the framework that it would start to fall that way.
Okay.
Yeah. So that is the value of the pre-application process. So the applicant has and we've spent a lot of time in the last sort of 12 months trying to really lift our engagement with consent applicants on any topic to come into the process much more aware of where things will land and what can you change in your proposal that might mean you can get things done.
And what would be the cost of a consent? If I was to apply tomorrow, what would be the cost of a consent?
So there'll be a deposit cost which is on our website. Sorry, I don't know what that is. And then it's currently based on time and materials. Yeah.
Right. Okay. I'm just interested in the comment of nature taking its course. It's probably just more of a statement around the question. If nature is getting it wrong, then surely we should have the ability to intervene to correct some of these situations. Why should we depend on nature all the time?
The law of unintended consequences.
Just thinking, last we tried to get a consent for some human activity on by the coast, and we got a lizard report, and then the whole consent failed.
Yeah.
So we have history of things failing, and Tony might be more aware of that than I. Thinking about where nature's doing its thing at the moment, and our lakes for generate electricity are low, and I think government's about to step in and change some levels on behalf of nature shortly, because otherwise our lights may go out. So government does do things at times as well. But that's not a question, that's just a comment. Councillor Mackle.
A couple. Would that flood event which washed out or scoured out the stream be classified as an act of God?
Depends on whether you're using the insurance version of an act of God or if that's what you believe.
So it was a flood event, so basically an act of God, which in turn forced you to surrender your consent.
No, it did not.
Did not?
No,
So
the
when-
flood event happened after the
Sorry.
consent was surrendered.
Sorry, my mistake. And the information going back to public, when that consent was surrendered, was the public notified?
The decision was made at a public meeting of the Central South Island Fish and Game Council in November, I think, 2019. And the consent was surrendered in January, so the minutes would have been out, they would have been on the website and everything, so yes, it was publicly notified.
And coming back to questions before, who owns the lake as such, it's obviously in an Ashburton district, but amongst the laughter, I heard a comment, public conservation responsibility. Can you elaborate on what you meant by that, please?
Sorry, I missed your question. What did you say?
Just wondering what you meant when we were talking about the ownership of the lake, with it being in the Ashburton district. There was a comment you made about it being public conservation responsibility in there or something, but you weren't.
Oh, so it's not as public conservation land. That's the definition of the land status, all right. But it's vested in the Ashburton District Council for control and management. Yeah. So Ashburton District Council control and manage Lake Campus.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you just last year, of course, did your consultation and feedback through your Lake Clearwater 30-year strategy process with that.
Yeah. So when that consent lapsed, did that information come back to the people that were responsible for the lake, being Ashburton District Council, through emails, etc.?
I can't answer that. I didn't investigate that, and
Possibly should have.
possibly.
Councillor Wilson.
It's probably to help inform the people that potentially could go for a consent, that if there's no water available, there's no point going for consent. That's pretty much the guts of it before you look at anything else. How would they, or whose responsibility is to understand and set the minimum flow in the Bell McCann stream? You know, it's because that's once the flows and the minimum flows have been set, then you can actually decide whether it's worth trying to get a consent before you start looking for lizards and versions and dock and fish, everybody and all the objectives. That's the number one thing you need to understand. How would they work out if there's water available effectively?
So first of all, I think not all water takes out of rivers have minimum flows. They usually have in the sense of suddenly you're on restriction or not, but they usually have a rate of take that might stage down. So that's just one aspect. Do you want to? I mean, water flowing on an alluvial fan like it does at our Bell McCann is really hard to understand. It's a lot like flows in braided rivers because the channels aren't active and visible to gauge and measure. It becomes really tricky. Do you want to?
Yeah, and it would be based upon, conversations with the science team and looking at what level the teams would feel that you're having an impact on the ecosystem health of the river, knowledge of the ecosystem and those conversations between Environment Canterbury and DOC would need to happen, and the applicant to help inform any recommendation.
Councillor Scott.
Neil, just thank you. Just making note of the the non-notified, partially notified, or publicly notified nature of consents. The cost does change as you get towards publicly notified. So that's something that you would need to understand pretty heavily because it can get quite wide, especially if it's public notified.
And then you'll get submissions for and against. And then you're into a hearing process, which the costs can keep rising.
Yeah.
Just have one question before I go to Councillor Brown. And it's over the lake that's there now and the aeration of it. If there's not much water going in and the water's sort of just sitting there, what's keeping the oxygen going in it when water's coming in and water's going out, so that turns it over, so to speak? So how does that work now with very little water going in or no water going in to keep it oxygenated?
I would say there's the macrophytes or the plants that are growing within the lake would help that. And you get when I was looking at it the last day, through the natural waves or movement of the water with the wind, given it's quite a windy location out there as well.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Brown.
Thank you, Neil. Just another lake again. Ellesmere, that is getting always opened now and again. Is that a consent? But you break it because it's not natural. You go there with diggers and everything else. So why is that happening there? And we can't do a bit of water on the.
So there is a consent in place that allows for the opening of Ellesmere mouth. So that's the difference here. There is a consent in place.
Okay.
And it is also tied to a water conservation order, I think, as well. I'm not sure of the details. I'm not so familiar with Lake Ellesmere, but there's a consent for that activity. Yeah.
And it,
Yeah, it's just been opened, it closed, and then it's opened again.
yeah, and it needs, with each of those openings or closing, it's an agreement that's reached amongst a group of stakeholders prior to it happening.
Councillor Hooper.
Thank you.
Yeah, which is a consent condition.
I understand that the wind at the lakes sort of helps with whipping things around and the life of the lake, etc. Is the wind being monitored down there at all?
Not by Environment Canterbury. I'd have to check the NIWA. It's not something we typically monitor. We'd look at water.
Jane.
Oh, apologies.
Just from being a member on the Otawharakai Working Party, certainly we have had data about wind presented by scientists. It might have been more DOC than ECAN from memory, or it might have been NIWA, but they certainly did have wind data.
Okay, thank you. Yeah. And now that the lake is smaller and heading into a drier summer, it looks like it could be smaller again. Where does public safety fit in with you guys? I assume that the number of people wanting to use the lake won't get smaller. So
I had a conversation with our staff in navigation safety around Lake Kemp. I had a chat with them actually just before going up to the hut holders AGM. So obviously their concern is always about safe boating. They don't have a regulatory role to dictate that, but they're wanting, from an education point, encouraging it. And obviously as the surface area gets less, the ability and confidence around safe boating and recreation reduces. So that is the challenge. So I guess from a what would be if somebody was wanting to apply for a consent, the values around recreation and those co-benefits or benefits may be things that would want to be emphasised. So that's just the point. But from obviously from a navigation safety point, it is acknowledged that the less water is, the more challenging it is for boating safely.
Councillor Mackel.
Thank you. When the consent was surrendered, was there any stages through the time of when it was surrendered and when there was flood damage, did ECAN allow water to run down that stream to recharge Lake Kemp?
There was nothing that was formally requested or done or authorised, no.
So from surrender, it was completely blocked off?
There may have been times when water flowed either through the intervention of people or naturally. I don't know, because we've not got staff there every day looking at it.
Yeah,
so we're not aware of any. Put it that way.
My question, a more direct question: did ECAN seal off that intake?
No, we didn't seal off the intake. When a consent's surrendered, it's not up to us to do that. That's the responsibility of the consent.
So effectively,
holder, yeah.
Water was allowed just to run down there at will?
I don't know the answer to that.
Because if it was shut off when the consent was surrendered, there would have been no scouring of that, I would believe. Would that be the case?
Who can tell where a river's going to move to on an alluvial fan? That there was a pathway there, whether or not that was actually resulted in where it's running now, I can't say.
So was it scoured out behind the weir as such, directly behind?
It's filled up and behind.
Filled up and behind, it's scoured in front where the channel was before it went into the structure.
Thank you.
It's dug down its bed into the bed of the river. Yeah.
So if you like, the Belmacan used to flow just below the top of that concrete lip there.
And an important thing to remember with that May 2021 flood is it did introduce a lot of sediment into Lake Kemp. Sure, the water level went up. It introduced a lot of sediment, which did have impact on the TLI for the league, yeah.
Councillor Earl?
Thank you. I've got a question that's been sent in, so I'll read it. The Ministry of Environment report suggests better collaboration and alignment between agencies and statutory bodies and catchment. The situation at Lake Camp is a perfect opportunity to come up with a solution that looks after the lake's ecological, cultural, social and recreational values. How do we work together to get a practical, cost-effective and timely response?
Good question.
Look, it's a great question, and it's one reason we met with the hut holders as a joint agency of the statutory agencies of the working group a month or so ago, for that exact reason. I guess the challenge we've got is that if one person's practical, cost-effective and quick is somebody else's compromise to real values that they are passionate about. That is the tension. So at the moment, the legal pathway is an application for a consent. That is, we are happy to have that conversation. Nobody has come to us and said, we want to be the consent holder. Please talk with us about this, Environment Canterbury. We would love that opportunity. But yeah.
Just thinking about Lake Ellesmere, and there is a consent to open it. Let's say there wasn't a consent, and we just let nature do its thing. What would happen at Lake Ellesmere?
I think we're getting slightly off topic, if I may, Mayor Brown, but I imagine...
Slightly, but we're not letting nature do its course there. We're enacting something because of something.
Because there's a consent there to do it. In the absence thereof, you may get flooding of land and property. I don't know, it's not the lake in question right here and now.
I guess the point here to come back to as to why we have consents is it allows the conversation to balance the different competing often or complementary values that are at play when we use resources. That is the bit. If somebody just bowls in and does something, that completely undermines that right. So you will have other people making calls on when that right, and we've seen that play out here in the Ashburton district with judicial reviews and all sorts of things about decisions. So that's the challenge we have, that allows for that judgment about how do we get this outcome, this benefit, this the ability to recreate, have confidence, not be worried about the lake draining completely and compromising the ecology, while also enabling people to that the effects of that is less than minor, is the term that the legislation uses, so that we still got lake what's the one down Emma and Roundabout and those wetlands, that the Bittons that are currently sort of have food supply. That's the balance. So this gets very emotive about consenting be this big evil thing that but it allows that balance to occur. Otherwise, it won't occur, and that'll lead to other issues. Yeah.
Thank you. Councillor McElwood. Councillor Scott's on next.
Yeah. Coming back to that, where in the consent that was surrendered, with the three groups, DOC, ECAN, Fish and Game. Fish and Game, I was just wondering what your thoughts were. You surrendered it, the consent, and none of you can tell us if it was sealed off or not. If you surrendered it, surely Fish and Game, in my belief, would be responsible for sealing it off. And if it wasn't sealed off, a flush of water and a great volume of water flushing through that weir and scouring out further downstream of the diversion has become back to whoever didn't seal it off. The responsibility should lie with you for that act of God with the flood event.
I disagree. So if you look at the picture, the weir that you're calling out is the concrete structure there. And if you look to the other photo that shows behind that weir, not like that one, but further in the presentation, you'll actually see that there's not scouring behind it.
Yeah, but we can't see where it comes out of the culvert.
That's that hole right there.
Yeah.
Here's
The first 20, probably first 30 metres of the diversion trench after the intake are buried.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So they were buried by the 2021 flood.
Here's this.
Subsequent to that, the stream has scoured down by the looks of it after the intake got buried. So the scouring, I would doubt this. I'm not a hydrologist, but
Neither
I
am
doubt
I, no.
very much haven't been on site that scouring relates to the intake at all.
I'm just wondering who's responsible for not sealing off that weir when the consent was surrendered.
I think what the point I'm trying to make here is
Doesn't matter.
it doesn't matter because it's sealed naturally in the 2021 flood. It
After
got-
the damage was done, yes.
Well, it needed to be dug out by hand, as we've seen in the consent, so I imagine it needed an awful lot of continual maintenance to remain open, that its natural position would be to get clogged.
I want to go back. The scouring has happened. So I'm no geologist, but what I've observed on site is that the intake has been buried, and then at some later point, whether it was part of the 2021 flood or a subsequent freshwater flood, has then cut down. So nature sealed the intake in the May 2021 flood.
Councillor Scott.
Just responding to Councillor McMillan's outside inquiry regarding the statutory groups getting together. Neil, I'd just like to understand from you in terms of that working group that is in place for Otu Wharekai, does that cover Lake Camp?
I'll defer to you, Jade. I'm not on the working group, but you are, or?
I am, but off and on lately. Judith and Tony are both on it, and yes, it does include Lake Camp.
Just to cover off that then, is that an extension that needs to be informed? I don't know, this is your working group. Thank you.
Yeah, but it all needs to be thought about, Peter. We will do that. Just before I go to Councillor Hooper, it might be a question for Tony. Do we, if council, someone went to get a consent from ECAN to do the work, would we get permission from DOC or would we need a permit from DOC?
Any applicant would need a easement permission, so it's a formal concession that you would need to apply for. And our threshold of evidence would be almost identical to the requirements for a resource consent. Yeah, we could do a joint pre-application meeting, absolutely.
Because whoever was applying wouldn't want to be in a situation where they get an ECAN consent
Correct.
and then not get a DOC permission, because it would would need to be done in conjunction, I would think.
And we could do that together.
You could do that, it's great news, thank you. Councillor Hooper.
Blending into that, I understand that a local contractor has offered to reinstate the stream, install a gate and metering gear free of charge. Would that help speed up the process any? And are we still going to have skink issues?
You may call them skink issues, but a Wildlife Act permit to injure, kill or maim rare skinks, because they are very rare skinks, would be required. But we would run that concurrently with any easement permission.
Yeah.
So they'd run at the same time. There's just a different set of considerations around the lizard. There'd be a lizard management plan. So, yeah, getting heavy machinery in there will have impacts on lizards. We can't deny that.
And it would still need to look at the receiving environment, of the impact, the water coming into the receiving environment, and look at the impact of the water leaving the environment for 8 days. They would be the two kind of assessments that you'd look at, as well as the physical doing of it. And that's part of that pre-app meeting.
I think the fact, the the generous offer by that contractor shows the, you know, the interest that the community have around this.
Yeah.
And that would definitely help ease the cost burden, because you might recall there is both the cost of applying, there's the cost of doing the work, and then there's ongoing costs such as water measurement and reporting that all come into play. So it doesn't, it addresses some of the middle and maybe helps towards the end tranche of that, but obviously that front up end. But it does, you know, we're keenly aware of that. That just shows you the, you know, what the community, you know, passion and desire around this issue is as well. Yeah.
Just one word of caution with any kind of intake structure there, is that the material that's on site there, if the stream is cut down so much at the moment and there's so much fall below in the stream below the intake site, that you would need to put a little bit of work and thought into what would a robust intake structure look like. And the local material that's there, I'm not an engineer, but I don't think it'll last 5 minutes in a fresh if you use the local material to build any kind of intake structure. So there's going to need, something we would be interested in is there would need to be some engineering input into the design of what any intake structure is, otherwise you'd be wasting the time. It'd blow out in the first fresh.
That some of that work has been done by Fish and Game in terms of the infiltration gallery solution that was put forward in 2014. Get my dates wrong, 1920. The point that I would make is don't put it where the old one was.
Yeah, I've been to the site as well. It would take some engineering to get that water lifted back up again to flow. Anyway, just think, Tony, the skinks at the rear, you find them there. Where else do you find them in Canopy or Aotearoa?
That whole Mount Harper area is a real hot spot for skinks in New Zealand.
That type of
skink, scree skink, you'll find them up on the sides of Mount Harper, up in the screes there. But it's actually really rare to find them in that in the Balmacan sort of river environment. And yep, they took quite a hit in the 2021 flood. We haven't found a white belly there since. We've got a population of white bellies are that threatened that there's possibly only 100 individuals left.
Do they like hiding and living in the Matagari?
Yeah, on the edges, coarse screes where they can pop out onto the rocks and disappear back in the rocks and the scrub there. So that's perfect lizard habitat, that sort of mixed rock and scrub.
In my uneducated view of when I saw it, is where the stream flowed down to Lake Camp. The Matagari was high and tall and flourishing because of the water that was going down, in my view. So that would have assisted the skink side, I would have thought. But I'm no scientist. Yeah, thanks. Councillor Mackle, and I think we're getting ready to wind up.
Yeah. Would it be fair to say the skinks isn't really an opportunity to cop out here, because there have been incidents over the west coast for mining with rare snails, etc. They can be moved easily for this area of land that needs to be dealt with. Would that be correct?
I couldn't answer that. I'm not a lizard expert, and that's what we need to have an applicant talk to us and come back to us with their lizard management plan to tell us what they're going to do. Relocation is an option that other people have used in the past.
Yeah, so not really an argument to use.
I'm not the applicant, so I couldn't tell you. Yeah.
Well, I think we're going to wrap up there. Thank you all for attending. It's been very helpful for us, and I think for the community too, to hear what you've had to say. There's been some tough questions in there, and you've answered them perfectly. Well done to you. Our next steps, councillors, is I think we need to think about what we've heard today. We've got a council meeting next Tuesday, and I'll put something in the Mayor's report where we can discuss next steps in the Mayor's report for next Tuesday on what you would like to do. So I'll make a section there for discussion in the Mayor's report next Tuesday. So thank you all for coming along. Thank you for the public for showing an interest, and all those at home who are listening in and will listen in later. There's a lot of public interest around this, and I think we all want to do the right thing, Just, we've got to do the right thing right. So, we all want to, yeah, thank you very much. Thank you.